So, joining me today, Tony Circelli, Head of Recycling Victoria, a highly respected leader in our industry. You and I have had the pleasure of working together through my commitment through the advisory board of Recycling Vic. Converted Melburnian now. We've been discussing. Tell me, Melbourne, Adelaide, who's got the better coffee?
Wow, what a way to start, George. Firstly, thanks so much for allowing me to come and have a chat with you today. I have really been looking forward to having this conversation with you. Look, the move over to Melbourne has been a really fantastic adventure for myself and my wife and my little dog, and going to, I guess, the nub of your question straight away. It's hard to go past Melbourne coffee, as much as it's probably difficult for a very proud South Australian. But Adelaide has some very good coffee as well. But look, I think Melbourne's coffee scene is pretty remarkable. Its food scene is amazing. It's one of the reasons we took the opportunity. We were at the right stage in our lives and our careers to take that opportunity to experience something a bit different. We couldn't be happier with that experience that we're still having every day, really. So,
tell me about that pitch. I'm really interested in it. So, you've come from the leafy suburbs of Adelaide, come to the inner, thriving northern suburbs of Melbourne. What was the pitch? What was the vision for RV, and how did that get you over here?
Look, I had been looking for some opportunities. I'd been with the South Australian EPA for a long time. I was there since 1994. I started just before the Environment Protection Act came into effect in South Australia. So I was there as a pretty young professional, and saw that through a remarkable change in growth, and was very, very lucky to be part of that journey for the South Australian EPA, which is, this might be argued, but outside of the Victorian EPA, is the second longest running Environment Protection Authority in Australia. New South Wales sort of started, then they got pulled back into the department, then they returned. So in terms of continuous EPA, South Australia has the second longest after the Victorian EPA. I've just been so lucky to be in the right place at the right time to be part of that journey. I was with it for 28 years, and George, I don't know what your parents, they probably have a similar background to mine, I suspect, but my parents worked in blue-collar jobs for decades. My father worked as a cheesemaker in Mount Gambier. That's where I grew up. Did it for 25 years straight, and I grew up thinking there's no way in the world I'm going to stay at any organisation for anywhere near that amount of time. And I think as you grow older, you realise how similar you are to some of your parents and some of those values that they share with you. But I got to that point. I'd spent over 25 years. I'd had the 10-year anniversary, the 15th anniversary, the 20th anniversary, and the 15th, the 20th. I'm pretty sure I was chief executive. So I'd started as a fairly senior young professional, but I'd worked my way through the Environment Protection Authority and seen every corner of that organisation. And finally, a great honour of actually leading the organisation during the maturity years of the EPA, obviously dealing with a lot of really quite difficult issues that EPAs have to deal with. But I got to the point saying, I can either do this for 5 more years, or I can. I was just early in a new contract, so there was no reason for me to move. Yeah. And I got a bit of a tap on the shoulder and a call from Victorian authorities and asking whether I was up for this new opportunity. And I looked at it. I thought, I think that makes a lot of sense. It really builds on a lot of the strengths and a lot of the reforms that I'd been involved in South Australia, but also nationally. That personal goal to experience another city. I'd been in Adelaide. I didn't grow up in Adelaide, as I mentioned. I grew up in Mount Gambier in the state's southeast, but had pretty much been in Adelaide since I was 17. And I thought, why not? We only live once, and as I said, we couldn't be happier with the opportunity. It's been an amazing and challenging time to establish a new entity like Recycling Victoria, but also at the same time experiencing a new place like Melbourne has been fantastic.
And three years in, as you look back now? Obviously, brave move at the stage of your career you're at, and obviously sounds like you've really taken to Melbourne, which is great because a very passionate Melburnian here, and we had no doubt if you had asked when you were considering that move, would you assimilate? Would you love it? Absolutely, especially that you've landed in the northern suburbs, which is definitely close to my heart because that's where I grew up. Tell me, 3 years in, as you look back, key achievements, the vision for Recycling Victoria. As I said, we've had the opportunity to work together for 2 years. I've really enjoyed my time on the advisory board. We were talking just briefly before about the engagement we've got at all levels of government now, push towards a circular economy. How do you look back on the last 3 years in terms of key achievements, and what are the things that most excite you about where you're going to take Recycling Victoria next?
Yeah, thanks, George. Look, I think for me, firstly, the entity of Recycling Victoria is quite unique, and that was one of the exciting parts of taking on this particular challenge. And it also had there was no legacy with it. So you could actually start this thing in the way that you would like it to be positioned right from the start, particularly around its culture and how it interacts with stakeholders and so forth. There was there's nothing that we had before, so it was just a great opportunity to be able to set that vision right from the start. And I'll come back to that. But firstly, Recycling Victoria, as I said, is quite a unique entity that's been created by the Victorian government, and it was in response to that SKM crisis that occurred, that curbside crisis that occurred, and I guess the realisation too that the waste and resource recovery and recycling industry has really moved to a different stage now, where it's not seen as one of those things that we don't want to talk about, the sort of the back end of things. It really is an integral part of society, and not everyone, but a big part of the community now really think about how they're using materials, and equally how they can avoid waste and how they can be part of the recovery of waste. A lot of people really feel for that now. I think that's been a real key difference from when I first joined this area, this field in the mid-90s, and seeing that community transition. And of course, that affects what's important from a priority perspective for government as well. So I think that was the real opportunity that we could define that, but also recognising that the uniqueness of the RV model was really around setting up both a regulatory and a strategic outlook and overview for the waste and recycling sector. And to ensure that, firstly, that the waste and recycling sector realise that they're an integral part of community services. So that aspect of service provision, similar to energy, the service provision around supply of energy or supply of water, it's seeing the waste sector and the services that the waste sector provides. It's seeing them in the same light. Not quite going to that stage of essential services, but the language in the Act is of that nature. It talks about essential waste.
It's interesting you say that, because that was actually where my mind went. I was reflecting, as you were just describing, us as an essential service in some ways, to obviously a really challenging time for all the industry during COVID. And I recall even during that period, a lot of talking around the family table at the time, friends and colleagues. I was the only one going to the office. I was the only one going into work. Yeah. I was sitting there in a pretty scarce boardroom as it was in my little construction hut at our site in Epping, and I was the only one there. But I was allowed to do that as an essential service because we did have a lot of work that was taking in curbside waste, and the government recognised at that time that the waste and recycling centre or infrastructure and industry that exists really needed to continue to run, to continue to service our communities. So during that short piece of time, we actually were recognised as an essential service. And I look back at that now and I say, well, what do we need to do to keep us elevated? And it sounds on what you're describing, that's very much aligned with the purpose of RV.
Very much. And I was, head of the Environment Protection Authority in South Australia during COVID, regulating landfills, regulating waste services, resource recovery services. And I think it took COVID for not just us in the industry and those related to the industry to see the importance of the sector. It then sort of became more evident to a lot of other people that this is a critical service and you can't turn off waste. it keeps getting generated every day. And so it's a similar, it's similar but different to, you can't turn off energy in a modern society. You can't turn off the provision of water. And so the Victorian government have moved, and it was sort of been thought about before COVID because of the crisis that happened with SKM, that these are critical services. We need to be able to pick up curbside waste. Industries that are still operating those services need to continue. And as you know, as being part of the sector, that interruption can occur at a number of different points in the whole supply chain. And so our role is to have a much more strategic view of that and build our understanding of the connections between particular parts of the provision of that service, and identify where the strengths are, and to see, well, why are they strong, but also to have a look at where the weaknesses are and what can we do to strengthen that. No different to other market-related type regulators that might be looking at the energy sector and looking at the provision of water as well.
And you've got quite an array of amazing tools now to do that, and the amount of data that you've been able to collect that really talks to impact of the industry, how you've gone about identifying those bits of critical infrastructure from a risk and consequence perspective and what importance they are to enable our communities to continue to operate. Just like a major energy disruption would occur significant disruption to our local community, as would a major shutdown of a critical piece of waste and recycling infrastructure. The way that you've gone about mapping that and being very transparent around the data, if we look back now, that must be something that you're really proud of, because that's taken a huge amount of effort, and it's definitely been extremely helpful, not just for people to be well informed, but also for businesses like ours and others that are looking to invest that sometimes don't necessarily have the right data available to say, well, what is the size of the opportunity here? What are the critical needs today, and what are the critical needs going to be like in the future? Those are the types of things that we need to make large-scale investment like what's needed. Tell me, that exercise, monumental. How have you gone about that? And as you reflect now on what's been achieved, what do you see the opportunities moving forward on how we can better utilise all that fantastic data that you've collected?
Well, it was interesting. So, coming over to Victoria and starting this up, it really was a blank piece of paper. And so it is building off what we know from other sectors, and trying to adapt that as best as possible to the waste sector. And we've had to start with the thresholds set. So very briefly, what happens is that we develop a submission to the minister each year around the particular risks and opportunities facing the particular sector, the waste and resource recovery sector. And we look at all aspects of it. Well, it could be the landfill sector, it could be the resource recovery sector, transport part of the sector, all aspects of the waste and resource recovery sector. And part of the role there is for the minister to consider that and to agree that and set and approve that plan. And what that does is to establish for the first time a consistency around what we believe are the major issues. And they can be waste related, but they could also be, cyber, for instance. How quick an opportunity and a threat are we seeing from cyber and things in the digital space? International events, and we saw with SKM and the China sword how quickly that interrupted and disrupted supply chains because we didn't have the resilience in the system and we were too reliant on it, and the system fell over. So it's not necessarily just here in Victoria or here in Australia, it's looking at the global risks as well. And that's the first time that there's been a structured approach to looking at all these risks. And the framework really looks at quite high thresholds in the first instance. It's looking at, well, which organisations really, if they fell over, would cause a lot of harm to the provision of service and cause impact to other, whether it might be local government or other entities like yours, George, it would cause impact up and down that supply chain. So it's still quite new. We've just issued our second circular economy risk consequence contingency report, and these entities, these responsible entities that meet this threshold are going into their second reporting cycle right now. It was interesting. I was at a climate governance forum just last week, and they were talking about the financial disclosures, the mandatory climate financial disclosures process that they've just kicked in over their first year as well. And listening to the ACCC talk about, like, this is about maturing the understanding for entities that are responsible for reporting and working with them to build that maturity. And it's interesting that some of the feedback, I've met with a few of them, and some of the feedback we get from these entities, because there's obviously a bit of a risk of regulatory burden, and we don't want to be putting regulation on people that makes no sense or doesn't have any sort of value.
Right? Yeah.
It doesn't move us forward. And the interesting thing, and this came through some of my experience with the environment protection legislation as well, that at first companies might see it as a burden, but once they put it into place, a lot of companies, depending on the leadership and the culture and so forth, they recognise how important it is to understand these vulnerabilities within their own supply chains. And they're probably doing a lot of this anyway, but probably not doing it in a structured way.
Yeah, look, I can tell you, having just gone through a very comprehensive workshop ourselves in preparation for this, like all risks, what you end up with is a whole list of opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's been no different as we've gone through the mandatory reporting from an emissions perspective, because every emissions challenge presents an opportunity to avoid rising energy costs, to reduce our carbon footprint, obviously, in our emissions profile, but also to progress and make leaps forward in terms of new technology, in terms of new infrastructure that's going to get better recycling outcome, to deal with this resource issue that we're all facing. And in actual fact, the list of opportunities that we're able to generate from exactly this sort of initiative that you're talking about was immense. And I can only imagine that it's been no different with what you've identified as the risk in terms of critical points of failure across the recycling sector, as you've looked at in Victoria. Yes, there's a whole heap of risk there, but there's also a whole heap of opportunity. And if you look at how you've been able to unlock some of that opportunity, which is something that I'm keen to really talk to you about now, because there's really good examples of how, by identifying key risks and supporting it with good policy and regulation, you've been able to unlock a world of opportunity. And yeah, the one that comes to mind is obviously the success of the CDS here in Victoria. And yeah, if we just think about how many other product stewardship initiatives there are, which I'm really keen to really pick your brain on why CDS has been so successful. But yeah, I've got a list of just a few. You've got the Australian Packaging Covenant, you've got PSO, oil stewardship, we got cartridges through Planet Arc, which is one that's very close to my heart because that was my first interaction with a product stewardship initiative that are able to untap a really innovative technology, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. Obviously, we've got Paintback, we've got Mobile Muster, we've got B-Cycle, and then we've got CDS. I look back and I didn't really understand what product stewardship was, to be honest, until I started interacting with Planet Arc, and that was through my road engineering days, where we were approached by a company called Close the Loop. They had a partnership with Planet Arc. They were collecting printing cartridges from offices, and they were recycling and capturing data from these cartridges and end up with a really problematic material that was right at the end of the value chain that was preventing them effectively being 100% landfill avoidance. It just so happened to be that was a really high-grade polymer. And we were able to take that polymer and use it to rejuvenate bitumen. That's a technology that's been now widely used across Australian roads more broadly than just the business I was involved in Downer. It's now been utilised in roads across the country. That wouldn't have happened if there wasn't something like a product stewardship at the time. No one had really thought what impact something like printing cartridges were having. But it was hugely successful, supported with obviously a good brand in Planet Arc, but really good businesses like Close the Loop, and a willingness to invest and innovate from industry. Look at CDS now and what's been able to be achieved there, what was identified as a huge risk, and we all saw the consequence of that, as you pointed out, on the back of what happened with SKM. And we look forward now, and it's widely considered one of the most successful initiatives that's been rolled out across circular economy, across the country and definitely here in Victoria. Why is that? Why has it been so successful?
So, look, really good observations around product stewardship. I think probably firstly, it's to recognise that there's a whole host of externalities that we, meaning when we purchase products or buy or obtain products or services, historically the cost of those, the other costs associated with the production and the supply don't generally get taken into account from a market perspective because everyone's trying to do it in the least possible cost. So, why worry about the pollution or the fact that all this material is going to landfill? I looked at some stats where the federal government and the states and territories have been working on this ever since I've been in this game. And some people say it's pretty slow progress, but it's pretty hard stuff as well. Because, again, we don't want to intervene, particularly for mandatory product stewardship schemes. We don't want to intervene unless we really have to. And there may well be a cost associated with that. So you're really trying to either minimise that cost or trying to make sure that the cost of introducing these schemes actually has an overall economic benefit, because it might be, in terms of CDS, it's cleaning up the cost of local councils having to clean up streets and parks because there's so much litter and because people don't value that product. It's just this throwaway culture. And for generally what we've relied on in Australia are landfill levies, and they have a really quite strong incentive for material that is heavy. So if you think of the construction demolition sector, concrete, soils, organics in your area, and because they're heavy, they don't tend to move across borders that much as well. There's a little bit of movement, but generally because they're heavy, you're trying to minimise transport costs and you're trying to look at local solutions. And plus, taking it to landfill is very expensive. You don't want to dispose this material. And plus, because it's expensive now to dispose, the levy gives companies like yourself and others in that resource recovery sector an opportunity to pay for the processing costs that are required to take that material to process it back to a material. So I think when you're talking about concrete, organics, glass, these sorts of heavier products, it's generally working pretty well. And our resource recovery rates, whilst we can improve for organics, our resource recovery rates for concrete and soils,
very good.
They're very good, and they have been for a long time, right? And then you have other products that might be light. You think of a can of soft drink or a small glass bottle of beer or whatever it might be. That stuff's not going to be impacted by the waste levy. It's just not. There's not enough of it, and it's very light. Plastics is another case. A lot of the things that you talked about there, they're not going to be picked up by that. And so if there is an environmental problem associated, there's a circular economy opportunity with all these things, but often they're driven, you think of the national discussion at the moment on batteries, a lot of that's accelerated to the top of the list of potential product stewardship or extended producer responsibility schemes, as we refer to a lot of mandatory systems. The reason that's got up to the top of the list very quickly is because of all the lithium-ion batteries, the change in technology, all these new technology batteries coming into the system, and obviously a lot of them faulty and catching fire. And we're finding, we're hearing more and more about particular premises that might be doing e-scooters not being able to even get insurance anymore because it's just too risky. So there are all these costs and risks associated with some of these products that haven't been factored into the price of the product, or there hasn't been proper ownership of the people putting these things into the system for what happens after they go into the system. So product stewardship sort of covers that. Product stewardship is something that identifies opportunistic but problematic materials as well, and assigns responsibilities right down the supply chain. So the concept, and particularly some of these voluntary product stewardship schemes, some that you've just mentioned, that they require companies that supply these products into the system to voluntarily come onto these schemes, to pay a fee. So tyres pay a fee, paint back, I think it's 15 cents a litre or something of that order per litre for the paint companies that are in that system, and they pay to paint back. And paint back then can offer resource recovery points. They can fund that. They can also fund the processing and get it back to a product that they can put back into the marketplace, rather than having it to, recovering used paint that might need to go to liquid management facilities and be evaporated off and be lost forever. So I think it's recognising that product stewardship is right for some products and not for others, and it's only needed for some products and not for others. And then we have this unique subset of product stewardship called extended producer responsibility. And CDS is a very strong example of that, and some of the schemes that we're thinking about at the moment nationally and from a state perspective are in that, do we need further responsibility for the producer, the person supplying these products? And so I'll talk about CDS because I know it really well. South Australia, of course, commenced CDS in 1977.
I was going to ask you about that. I assume they were the pioneers because everyone used to say everyone's can had a high amount cents per can in South Australia.
It was the best advertising for South Australia. I found no one looks west too often here in Melbourne. They generally look north, right? Fair enough, right? But it was the best bit of advertising South Australia had for decades because there was the national production of these products. Soft drinks are produced for the national market, not for the South Australian market. And our branding for 10 cents had South Australia and then later had Northern Territory, had SA. And we were working with that. So we were working with New South Wales, which was the first big state to come online. And we were working with them and saying, well, how can we change this stamp that we've had? And we had to give up, we had to give up SA branding. And we were very happy to do that because South Australian, I really, some of the motivation that you get with sticking to this job, which is, can be a challenging one because it's about change. And often it's about people having to do things a bit differently and maybe, changing market share and all those sorts of things. So, there's some serious consequences with some of the stuff that we do. But I tell you what, some of the leaders that I've seen that have stood up to criticism, stood up to significant pressure from industry and from the sector, and to keep their nerve and to keep pushing through some of those challenges. And I saw that time and time again in my career at the SEPA with some of the ministers on both sides. This was a bipartisan, both sides of politics, all sides of politics saw what CDS was not, it cleaned up our streets. It came in response in the 70s because of consumerism and the fact that we started getting small cans. And there's some amazing pictures of Adelaide Oval before it looks like it does today of just cans strewn all over the place. And there was just outrage. And there was something about the mid-70s in South Australia. There's a lot of social movement there. And this got attention. For a small state to take on the sector at that time, and I've seen the clippings, I have them, the sector in South Australia are very proud of what they've done to not only start it, but to continue continue the scheme because it offers so much. But they've provided a lot of that early history, which is quite remarkable. And it comes to, like any change in politics is not easy. And I have a lot of respect for these people that basically we're sitting on the shoulders right now, and so I feel like it's part of the inspiration I get on a.
It must be coming full circle for you in some ways, being involved back in South Australia.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, overseeing the governance around a scheme as big as what CDS has become. But as I was listening to you, then I couldn't help but think about what the opportunity would be to take that and spread that more broadly across the rest of the country. And I think it takes people to take a brave step, like what you've just described in South Australia and a small state with a really, strong social focus at that point in time and a particular need that gained momentum. And we've seen the power of momentum. Once a community gets behind it with good policy and government to support it, industry will react. There's a huge opportunity there to invest, and we're obviously seeing that now as that's transformed into what's become a very sophisticated CDS scheme. You and I have spoken about this a fair bit through our work with Recycling Victoria. We can't help but think what the opportunity is to untap nationally if we're able to sort of harmonise our approach more around this. You think about the segregation of our states in terms of the focus and resource around policy and government and regulation. You think about the effectiveness of things like the product stewardship schemes that we've just spoken about, having more consistency across them nationally. We spoke a little bit about our recycling rates. They still do vary across states and territories, a little bit less evolved in some. And, some of that is around urban density and just general volumes, but also some of it is around inconsistency in systems and policy and regulation. Why is it so hard to harmonise? You've had the opportunity to work across 2 different states now. You've seen a little bit of both. I'm sure you've seen some similarities. You've probably seen some differences. Why do you think that is? That it is so hard to harmonise across this country?
Firstly, probably just to recognise, just going back to what you said, one of those motivations of standing on the shoulders of some of these early heroes, really, in the environmental movement. And really having the opportunity to come over to I don't put myself in hero, please don't read that into what I've just said, but having the opportunity to come to the second most populous state, a quarter of Australia's population, and to bring in outside of New South Wales, a big CDS scheme was obviously a very big motivator for me. There's some other quite remarkable things that we've done at Recycling Victoria. But that was just a gimme opportunity, really, to be part of that. And but by the time I got here, the team within the department had done an amazing job to design this. It is the most modern, most technologically advanced CDS system in the world because it's the most recent. We've got the best technology here in Victoria by far, and I can go into some of the details, but. What an amazing opportunity, and to see it be so amazingly embraced by the Victorian community at so many different levels. We've just crossed over 2 billion containers just in the last couple of weeks. I was reading the report this morning. 2 billion containers. We're not quite at 2 years, so it took us 1 year to get to 1 billion containers. Literally to the day. We were looking at it, we thought, God, we're going to get to it. Can we say...
Did you have a counter? Were you getting it live data?
Well, this is one of the things about the Victorian system, and I can't speak for some of the others. I think the New South Wales system would be pretty close to this attribute of the Victorian system, but it's completely electronic. This has been one of the real problems with the South Australian system, that it's completely non-electronic. It's completely manual. It's analogue. And we have problems because of that, because we don't really know how many containers are coming into the system, and how much refunds are provided based on how many returns. So if you're basing that on a weight basis, well, how many containers are in that bale of waste, particularly if there's light weighting going on, different size containers, it's really difficult.
I can imagine, yeah.
And so they've really worked hard to try and deal with that in South Australia. But the opportunity to have something that's completely electronic, which means every container is counted. And that's great for auditing purposes and all sorts of things. But the other benefit, of course, is that the data is almost real time. So we can find out on a daily basis where we're at. We know how many millions of containers we're collecting each week.
How many do we think there are in terms of we've collected in the 2 billion?
So in that first year, as I said, literally to the day of the first year, and this was about, can we say that to the minister? Can the minister say this on the first? And we said, yeah, we can. We can tell the minister that it's 1 billion containers today. Yeah. It took us around about just over 10 months to collect our 2 billion. And so this acceleration will happen for probably two, maybe a couple more years. But a remarkable, it's been a remarkable introduction, and some of the other states as well. I think the Vic Return and the 3 network operators we have, they should all be. This is not, we talk about product stewardship. There's so many people involved in making this a success story here in Victoria. We have we oversee it all, and we have contracts that we're regulating with each of the parties. But and we have the joy of also celebrating the overall results as well, like Vic Return, the scheme coordinator. But yeah, I think to have the ability of the people that the state has contracted into has really been a big part of the success.
And some really big investments to back it up, but the actual infrastructure to go behind not just the collection, but obviously the recovery of all the containers that are being collected. Big scale investments. Are you able to talk to the sort of the scale of some of these investments?
Look, it's probably not information I've got to hand, but if you think of there's nearly 650 separate points of collection across the state. There was 0 2 years ago. So, well, when we first started, there was we've been building, it's probably around 400 or something like that. So we've been building and building. So that first year was really, and there was milestones in place in terms of getting to full scheme. So we got to full scheme on time, which was 9 months after the commencement. And, you know, that wasn't easy. You can imagine with each of these collection points, more money. That's both technology, but we're talking about depots as well. There's contracts, there's employment, you know, there's all sorts of things. And the other thing that was happening right through this and is continuing now, and it'd be pretty hard not to see the sort of the branding and the advertising that's going on, which is very limited in South Australia because of the lack of the framework that's been built with some of these new schemes. And South Australia is looking at building that up at the moment. But the fact that the part of the scheme has to fund itself in terms of education is a really key and important part of the scheme, rather than leave that to somebody else or the state government to do that. So it's all those costs associated with establishing this 650 strong collection point system in Victoria is funded by the producers of these products through the scheme fee that goes to the network operator, that gets passed down, goes to the scheme coordinator, that gets passed down to the network operators, who then pass it on to you when you go and return
It's
your
amazing,
containers.
you know, we think about that, the sort of network of critical infrastructure that's now being deployed across this state, that obviously gets better circularity in terms of outcomes. There's a financial incentive to its participants, you know, in obviously interacting with the system. You spoke about some of the other benefits there from a litter perspective, and sometimes, you know, I think as an industry, we can do more of conveying to our stakeholders and local community that these are real cost avoidance to them, because ultimately, apart from the pollution that this causes, it's a cost to go and remediate.
Yep.
You know, you need to talk to a number of local councils in Melbourne at the minute, and one of their biggest pains at the minute is illegal dumping and littering. Landfill levies going up is a great incentive for additional resource recovery infrastructure, but it also has some flow-on effects because illegal dumping and the cost of disposal is rising. The more cost the councils need to incur as a result of that, ultimately will get passed on. You know, they've got to be able to recover it through the rates. And I think what we can do more to be able to communicate that real benefit to local community, to say, look, these are actual real dollars that at some point you are going to have to incur unless we've got this network of infrastructure there, because waste disposal is going to continue to increase over time. And unless we've got the right infrastructure there and we protect it, then we're going to continue to suffer from increased cost. And protecting that infrastructure, now that it's been deployed in the case of the CDS network that's out there, but also other critical infrastructure that we've spoken about, you know, in your view, and you've done a lot of work on this already in terms of the infrastructure plan that obviously just been put out, you know, how do you see the balance of priorities from government around we need more housing, we need to protect critical infrastructure like waste and recycling because it is an essential service and it should be held to the same regard as energy and transport and all other essential services. You know, how have you seen that tension being managed in your time at RV? And I'm sure it's a constant challenge around budget pressures and everything else. From your perspective, what are the key things that government we need to be thinking about as they sort of look to balance these priorities?
Look, I think it's a challenge in any jurisdiction. Like, how do you balance the competing interests? We want all these things, don't we? We want it all. We want our cake and we want to eat it as well, don't we? So, and we need it all. So, and I think the planning system that we've got in Victoria, you know, it's very. I think it's very advanced and it's very progressive. So part of our role, part of Recycling Victoria's role, is to publish a Victorian recycling infrastructure plan. That's a 30-year outlook on where the opportunities are, where the gaps are between the waste that we estimate will be generated and the capacity that's available in the system. And so, you know, it's a great tool, obviously, for the investment community, both here in Victoria, nationally and internationally, to see, well, where are the opportunities here? Like if we want to invest in this sector, where are the opportunities? Well, that's a really important thing, and there's not too many states that have that. I think a lot of states, because we've got a structured approach of doing that, it's required by law. We have to update it every 3 years. We've issued the first one. We're already into, preparing for the second one, and we've set up. We just had our first meeting of our industry working group. Really keen to make sure
just on that process as you're doing that, Tony. If I can just touch on one thing, so the amount of stakeholders that you must require to engage with, you've got obviously energy authorities, you've got water authorities, you've got local government in terms of their strategic planning, making sure that what they're thinking of these precincts longer term is not misaligned to setting up facilities that are protected from a sort of encroachment of urban sprawl and obviously higher density living, which we're seeing more and more of in Melbourne. What does that engagement piece look like? Because it must be a huge exercise just to map out all the key stakeholders as you're developing this plan and making sure that what you put out is not contradictory in any way to what the key infrastructure around it or key authorities around it are envisioning for those areas. How does that sort of stakeholder mapping happen?
I think if you think about the concept of stakeholder engagement, particularly from a public sector point of view, sometimes it's sort of viewed as like a bit wishy-washy, nice thing to do. I feel very different about that. I feel, and it's one of the things I was able to sort of talk about and ensure that we really positioned ourselves well from day one, was that we want to be an outward-looking, we want to be an outward-facing entity. And I learnt that through the hard knocks of in South Australia, that we were getting our best outcomes when we don't necessarily meet with industry and just nod our heads and say, yes, sir, yes. That's not what it is. It's sharing where we're coming from, what our challenges are, and also hearing the intelligence from the sector. I firmly believe that it's a pretty obvious thing to say, but often it's not a widely held concept in governments that the industry know best what's going on. You just have to make sure that there's no competing interests or conflict of interest. So you've got to build that information into your system. So to answer your question, we look at engagement as we require. We don't engage. We'll engage to connect and to establish relationships, and then it will be engaging for purpose. So if we've got a particular purpose, we'll look at and customise it for that. CDS engagement has been really strong. We do that on a very scheduled basis, but it's right for that purpose. They're very different stakeholders to the infrastructure question you've just mentioned. So one of the things that we'll do is if we feel that we need, so we've got the Recycling Victoria Advisory Committee, which is a very broad skill and experience-based group that we have at our disposal to engage with and get some feedback, whether it be on strategy, policy, or we've got some great industry expertise on there as well that I really enjoy putting our stuff to that group, because you can road test some of your thinking. You can make sure you don't go out to the broader sector and you're nowhere near the mark.
I've got to say, look, obviously first-hand experience there, having been on the committee with you for the last 2 years, but it's been really refreshing from an industry perspective just to have a voice and to know that you're being heard, to have an opportunity to get insights, to where government's priorities are, to be very transparent about what the challenges are. Obviously, we've had good engagement with the minister through the advisory committee, and I think it's been something that I can't put example to in other industries. I think it's very progressive, from a recycling perspective, to really heighten the awareness and importance of our sector. Credit to you for it. I can say from my perspective, I've really truly enjoyed the time on the committee, and hopeful that we obviously continue in the current form. But it's been really a game changer for industry to know that you've got a government here that's willing to listen, that's willing to have you contribute towards some of this policy, that's willing to give you a voice to understand where your challenges are. And I think your openness to sort of go and engage and say, well, industry does know best in pockets. Yes, there might be competing priorities. Obviously people want to grow their businesses and it needs to be done in a sustainable way, that it's got the right impact to the local community, that's managing the risks that have been identified by government. But it's helping everyone make better informed decisions, both from the way we deploy capital, to the type of recycling outcomes that we get, to the way we protect our environment, and to the way that we protect our local communities. And I think to that end, the work that's been done is fantastic, and I'm really hopeful that
I appreciate you providing that feedback. I mean, it's mutual. It's mutual, George. You know, I honestly believe in that model, that it's got to be a collaborative approach, and not just because it sounds good and it feels good, because we're going to make better decisions when we're in this together. And I've seen this through, it's been, I think if you asked people in South Australia what my DNA is in terms of leading public sector services, including regulators, there's some belief somewhere, excuse me, that regulators, you know, somehow conflicted when they go talk to the people they regulate. Well, that's rubbish. You know, you don't have to agree with what you've been told, but to not have that opportunity to keep that open door to what people, to the community that you're actually regulating, I think is a real lost opportunity where it happens. So that's been part of, I think, something that I've brought, because I personally believe in it. I think we're big enough and we're grown up enough to know, you know, where the boundaries sit, and where, sorry, but we're not going there, but we can come here. And so, yeah, I think beyond the advisory committee, we've really made sure that we've kept that sort of approach in all the services that we provide. And I think it's and I see that with government here as well. I mean, I see that with the minister came yesterday, and he was suggesting we have another forum. And I thought, I'm thinking, I'm not sure people were seeing but yeah, it's a great idea. So we're now organising that. So, I talked about the responsible entities before. Now the big sort of entities in the sector. We're going to have a look at the next tier down. What does that look like? And let's get a group together and let's talk to them about, from more an SME perspective, and they're probably still larger, probably more ME rather than SME, but what's concerning them? And because they've got duties as well under this new framework as well, and we haven't really had the capacity to sort of go out and do broader engagement. So it's taking those opportunities, and also where you've got that, authorisation to keep going out there and keep learning from industry. I mean, that's fantastic. That's a great environment to be working in.
I think it's definitely obviously being empowered to be able to interact, and we've seen good support through obviously the minister to be able to go out and do that. But a big piece of it is also the culture that you've been able to bring, and obviously your approach from your previous role as head of EPA in South Australia. That willingness to be open to industry, I think, is a testament to you in terms of your personality, the way that you're transparent, your passion around the sector, and you want to continue to deliver more. So from my perspective, continue doing what you're doing, because it's been a breath of fresh air across the industry here in Victoria. We hope that you become a full-blown Melburnian and it becomes a lot more than 3 years. Thoroughly enjoyed your time, Tony. Really appreciate you giving us this. And look forward to having a chat again and continuing the work that we do in Recycling Victoria.
Yeah, well, look, thank you. And that's really lovely feedback, but I'd also like to share some of that with you and the leadership. I've seen, I don't know too much about your journey, and it'd be nice to sort of share that as well at some point, but I've seen similar journeys in other places, and the amount of courage and purpose, it may well be sort of, something to do with why you've named your company that way as well, but I think well done to you. I mean, this is not an easy sector to work in, particularly if from that, non-corporate sector, from sort of SME and it's a larger SME. So well done. I mean, well done. I look forward to seeing more of what you're doing, George, and well done for having a conversation with a number of people from within the sector as well. I think it's fantastic and can only improve things. Just to continue understanding what drives people, I suppose, to be in this sector and the massive opportunities. But driving the right culture, I think, to ensure that we're in it together, and we're never going to always agree on everything, but on most things we will agree on, so let's find those areas of commonality and let's keep pushing this thing forward, because, as I mentioned before, we have had incredible progress over the last 10 years in Victoria and in other places across Australia. And we constantly look at the problems, and we have to address the problems, but we should also be celebrating where we've got to, because it is one of the best recycling resource recovery stories in the world that we've got here in Australia, and I don't think we talk about it enough. So well done. I look forward to hearing some more of your podcasts in due course, but and hopefully we can continue that connection both within and external to RVAC.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much.